Welcome to Mental Health Matters. My name is Barbara Meyers, and I'm the host of the show. In today's show, we're going to be talking about bipolar disorder. And I have two guests that are going to be exploring this with me. I'd like to introduce the first guest, Beth Schaefer.
Hi, Barbara.
And Beth is a person who's living with bipolar disorder. And the second guest, John Schaefer, who is Beth's husband and very supportive in her struggle with this illness. And they've been married for 23 years, and I've known them for maybe 10 years or something like that, and Beth is doing very well right now, and I'm just really delighted, and I'm happy to have her here so that she can talk to us about what she's been through. This particular subject has a special meaning for me because I, too, am living with bipolar disorder. And before we start hearing Beth and John's story, I thought I would describe what bipolar disorder is. For bipolar disorder, there need to be two things present. One is a depressive episode when you're depressed, and one is a manic episode when you're very high. So it's this alternation between highs and lows is what's characteristic of bipolar disorder. In a depressive episode, the kinds of things that one has that characterize a depressive episode are symptoms such as diminished interest or pleasure in anything, insomnia or hypersomnia nearly every day, being agitated, being very fatigued, feeling worthless, can't concentrate, and sometimes thoughts of suicide. The manic episode, on the other hand, has symptoms of inflated self-worth or grandiosity, a decreased need for sleep, being talkative, very talkative and very fast-talking sometimes, thoughts that are racing, being distractible, and excessive risk-taking, such as shopping sprees, sexual indiscretions, driving too fast, those kinds of things. There's something that is similar to mania, but not quite as exaggerated as mania, which is called hypomanic, which has many of the same symptoms, but it doesn't impair your ability to function socially, or as true mania does. So there are two kinds of bipolar that sometimes people distinguish, and bipolar 1 is cycling between a depressive episode and a manic episode, and bipolar 2, which is cycling between a depressive episode and a hypomanic episode, so you don't go quite so high. In my own story, I had depression that was first diagnosed after the birth of my daughter, and it was several years later when trying to understand this that I had with my doctor, we were able to identify ups and downs, in my moods, and when I was treated for bipolar disorder, that treatment seemed to work better than just being treated for depression. So my highs aren't the real super high manics. They're more like just being extra hyper and vigilant about things, I guess. So this show, as I said, has special meaning for me because of that. So now what I'd like to do is let Beth and John tell their story about how the illness has touched them. So, Beth.
Well, when I was 23, I was first diagnosed with depression. I was in graduate school. John and I were newly married. We just moved across the country. We had a lot of changes in our lives, and it was stressful. But I became depressed, and fortunately saw a good doctor who recognized it right away and began taking antidepressants. Within a couple of months, I was doing much, much better. Things seemed to really improve. And soon we tapered off the medication, and I thought, well, that was that. Well, it got much more complicated. Within a few months, the same thing happened, and I got back on the medicines and once again went through that cycle. about 5 years later, by the time I finished my graduate program, I'd been on and off antidepressants about a half a dozen times. Well, things continued. I finished my degree in biology and went on to work as a science journalist, and again, within a short period of time, became ill, and this time became much more ill. I was hospitalized this time because I felt very suicidal. I couldn't think of much except different things I could do to harm myself. And did better after being in the hospital and trying still more new medications. But for the next several years, things continued to be very difficult. I tried probably 25 or so different medications as new ones became available. And soon we realized that we needed to turn to something else, and that was electroconvulsive therapy, or ECT, which is also known as shock therapy. Despite its not always wonderful reputation, ECT is very safe and very effective and worked wonders for me. I think it probably saved my life several times. So a few treatments with ECT did some damage to my memory as a side effect, but brought me right back mood-wise every time, which was terrific, but it didn't last very long. So I had about 12 years where I was undergoing ECT every few months, was certainly not able to work at that time, and things were difficult until a few years ago. I was very fortunate and discovered a study going on of a new experimental treatment called transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS, where a magnet, a very powerful magnet, is held to the side of the head, and strong pulses are given, and to a very specific area. And within a few weeks, I was doing much better. I've had several rounds of that treatment, and I'm very glad to say in the last year I've been depression-free, which is just a real blessing.
That's fantastic, yes. Yeah.
The other thing to mention is that during that time, I also discovered that writing became very important to me. I'd written professionally, but began to write personally, and write in a journal, and then to explore other kinds of writing, and thought this is something that really adds to my whole treatment. And began to feel like, well, maybe this could help other people. So I started a creative writing group for people who have mood disorders. And I've actually continued that for about 9 years now. And it's been very, very rewarding to me. And others have found that it's been a helpful creative outlet for them as well. So I've just written a book that's based on that course, and is a guide to people with depression, how they can write, and that'll be published next year.
Well, that's great.
We're excited, and we're also excited that we'll be adopting a daughter this year.
Oh, that's wonderful. I know that I've seen you over at least the last 10 years in some of your worst times, and this has just been a flowering of you, coming out of that. I just couldn't be happier for you, so it's just really good to see that. Now, I know part of the reason why Beth was able to get over the worst of her illness is because she has a supportive husband. So I'd like to talk to you, John, for a minute about how the process with you, when it first started and when it got worse, and now that it's gotten better.
Thanks.
Okay.
It's been an interesting ride, and it continues to be an interesting and a great ride, because we met in college when there were no symptoms of depression, and I got to know her and to enjoy her and to love her and to build a great friendship and a great relationship, which I think is a critical part of being supportive, is being able to be friends with and understand that the person who's being masked by this illness is still inside there, and to appreciate and to love that person. And there's always a challenge in separating the person, the illness, the side effects, general environment, and everything else. But if you have that basic foundation of loving each other, then that certainly makes it much easier. The other thing that's made it much easier for me is that Beth has been well enough to be able to maintain responsibility for herself, and she's done a great job of taking care of herself and taking her medication and going to support groups and now leading support groups and all of those things that, as a person who's trying to deal with that situation, it changed the emphasis so that I wasn't responsible for her health. She was, which I know I've I've gone to support groups for families who are dealing with mental illness, and that's not always the case, that there are parents or adults or caregivers in some situations that have to essentially force the person to comply with the medicine or to comply with the treatment regime. So we've been very fortunate that even during the worst of times, Beth has been able to get to the point of saying, no, I think I need something more. I think I need to check myself into the hospital or additional treatment. So from that standpoint, we're very fortunate. We're also very fortunate in the sense that we do have an extended network of people, so she's not relying on me to be able to provide things. So for all of those things, it's been much easier than some people have to deal with. I think whether it's on the easier side or the more difficult side of dealing with it, there are certain things that you need to be able to do when you're in a situation where you have somebody who's not feeling well, whether that's physical or emotional, mental issues. And some of those things are you just need to make sure you're taking care of yourself, that you know where your boundaries are, that you seek help if you can, that you educate yourself about the illness, that you try and find out as much as you can. And if you're able to maintain that level of information, protect yourself, then you're able to help that person, and it becomes a very helpful cycle where you're taking care of each other.
Right. Oh, that's good. I guess I wanted to ask both of you, what is it that, I know hope is always such an important part of getting better, and what is it that gives you hope? Or what is it, can you think of a time when something happened where you thought, this is going to be okay, I'm going to get through it, I don't know. Is there something in particular that...
I think for me a lot of different things have filled that space at different times. John has, as you said, has been just incredibly supportive, and I'm so grateful for that. And there have been times when just sitting down and having a talk about how I'm doing has been very helpful, and other times when we sat down and talked about something completely different and got me away from how I'm doing, but into being distracted and thinking about other things that have really helped. Support groups have really given me hope at times, learning from other people who've been through serious depressions or through serious manias, and I did go through a number of those as well. And excellent medical care, really trying to seek out the best care you can and to learn as much as you can all the time and to keep learning.
For me, the hope comes in the fact that there's a lot of great development happening in this field, that we've seen so many different medications, and some of them have worked better than others, whether it's ECT or the transcranial work that's being done now. There's so many new things that are out there that there is hope, that it's in some cases it's almost a race against time for people who are struggling. There is somebody out there who's working on something that may help you.
And sometimes, each person, the combination of drugs and therapy for each person, it tends to be very individual, so it could be even a combination of things that are there or some new things that help at times. So I'd like to hear about your book, Beth. Tell us what your book is about.
It's called Writing Through the Darkness, and the subtitle is Easing Your Depression with Paper and Pen. So it's a guidebook to people who are coping with depression or with bipolar disorder or a situational depression. And it leads them into discovering what kind of writing might be useful and healing to them. So it gets people started on writing that they can do immediately. They can get started that day. And it helps people explore, well, is poetry really the best thing for me? Is that where I really feel excited and feel like this is the thing that really helps and heals me? And some people really feel like that's the specific thing for them. Many other people, especially people going through this kind of long, serious illness, feel that writing the story of their illness, writing a memoir of their illness is very healing. So it touches on how you can explore all those different kinds of writing, and even how you can start a group as well for other people.
Oh, that's great. I'm sure it's going to be very helpful to many people. So
I hope so.
Yeah, I'm glad you've written it.
Thank you.
I know that you're both involved in a spiritual community, and I wanted to ask you, how has that helped in your journey with this illness?
I started really exploring my spirituality, both intellectually and in a more spiritual manner, during my really darkest years, and they were 12 or 14 years that I consider were really very ill. And finding people who are supportive of me, whether they knew a lot about mental illness or not, people that were willing to say, you're worth something and we support you on your path of searching for what's meaningful for you. Those were very important things. So I began to read books. I began to explore the Unitarian Universalist Church and founded what I felt like was a real home there. And a lot of people there have been really instrumental in supporting me, I think.
That's good.
Yeah.
Okay.
For me, spirituality is about taking care of your soul or your inner self, which is an important part of dealing with situation when you're in a stressful situation or you're dealing with illness. So the nurturing that you get just out of taking care of yourself is important. Plus, there's physical elements of having a caring community that you're a part of, and just knowing that there's somebody who you can turn to if things get bad. We've had plenty of people who have helped during periods of ECT where they came and helped take care of the transportation, and so there's a real sense of friendship that builds up from it, and that's been very helpful.
I have a list here of things that I have gotten myself and from other people in various groups that help people when they're going through depression. And I guess I'd like to say some of them and then get your reflections on any of them. The kinds of things that I have found that are helpful to me and others are getting psychotherapy, effective medication prescribed by a psychiatrist, exercise, meditation, yoga, a good, solid, balanced diet, little or no alcohol or caffeine, get plenty of rest, avoid getting overcommitted in any activity or activities, learn the cycle of your illness and how you can recognize when you're about ready to go down so you can take action at that time. Doing something creative, that's doing writing. My particular favorite is weaving. So I'm a weaver, and I spend a day weaving. That usually pulls me out if I'm on the edge of starting to go down and I spend a day weaving. It pulls me out of it. It doesn't work for everyone, but for me it does. Doing something to make yourself laugh or cry or get angry in a safe place. Join a support group. Help someone else, especially someone with similar symptoms. And learn how to love yourself as an individual, spiritually and creatively. There's no one on earth quite like you. So those are things that I have found. I don't know if you have other things that you'd like to add to the list or not.
I think I would agree with virtually everyone there. Yeah, I think therapy is also very important. At various times, I think was really very pivotal in my healing.
Yeah.
And continues to be a little bit. Medication and a really good doctor who really works with you has been very important. I still take a number of medications, and I expect I always will. So those have been especially healing, but Also meditation, yoga, support groups have all been very useful. And I do think creative outlets, no matter what they are tremendously useful as well. I know, people who paint, who dance, who do all sorts of things, and that's important. And I really think your idea of trying to learn your ups and downs when they're still small is very important. So sometimes John can tell better than I can if I'm starting to go up too much and I'm kind of too busy and talking too fast and not sleeping enough, and things are getting a little bit hypomanic. But we try and work together on those.
Good. John, you already gave us a number of things. I had a list here of what things that family and friends can do, and John's already virtually said most of these.
I think if I can leverage off the list that you had, there are a couple of things that really rang true for me, which are that you have to recognize the good that comes out of the illness, as well as being willing to admit that sometimes it just stinks, and being able to really honestly look at it, the situation, and collectively just say, this isn't what we signed up for. This is rotten, and acknowledging it takes away some of the power that it has over you. And at the same time, trying to enjoy some of the positive sides of things. A somewhat silly example of it is that, as Beth mentioned, as a result of the ACT, sometimes there are memory gaps, and we try and look at it as it's almost a Zen experience, that you keep experiencing things for the first time anew. And you can look at that same situation and be really frustrated, which you're entitled to because it's not right. But there's also some things that bring a new appreciation for life. It's almost as though people who are suffering from other serious illnesses come to see that there's a great value out of the good days that you have. And I think recognizing that balance of the good and the bad and giving them both the legitimacy they deserve is useful.
I'd like to talk a little bit about when I was first depressed, and I remember feeling so incredibly powerless and helpless and hopeless, and my self-esteem just, dropped way down, and it took a long time for me to get back to having a positive attitude and trying to find, like you said, the good things, or what's positive that you can say that's come out of this experience. And I always think of it as being sort of miraculous that I could go from feeling so horrible and yet have come out of it with there was something of value that I got out of that. Like you said, people that have had serious medical problems and they get better, they have more appreciation for their life, and what's happened since then. So
I think that's true. You feel like there's not time to waste. You need to take advantage of every day as much as you can, and I think it engenders compassion for other people as well. People who are dealing with similar problems and also very different problems.
Certainly did so for me. Okay. Well, thank you. I have a challenge, as we usually do, for the studio audience, something for you to do. What I want you to do is think of a time when you were depressed or a loved one of yours was depressed, and think of what it was that made you feel better. And would any of these ideas that we just mentioned possibly fit into that category? And when you find something and you think of something that might do better or that did help you, take that idea and remember it, put it somewhere up here so you remember it, so you can take it out the next time that something happens and use that as an asset to your wellness. So that's your assignment. There are some organizations that I'd like to tell you about that you may be able to find helpful information. One is something that's called the Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance, DBSA. Their website is at www.dbsalliance.org. They have chapters all over the United States. In particular, in Alameda County here, there are chapters in Berkeley, Castro Valley, and Pleasanton. They have regular meetings that you can go and attend. There's another organization called the National Alliance on Mental Illness, or NAMI, and they have a website, www.nami.org. There are chapters all over the country, and in particular there are two in Alameda County, one in Pleasanton and one in greater Alameda County area. They run what they're called family-to-family classes, which teach families how to deal with their loved ones having various kinds of serious mental illnesses. There are a number of support groups in most areas in the country. In Alameda County, there are several of them. The website of my church, there is a list of them. You can look at them at www.mpuuc.org/mental health. Press some of the buttons you'll find there, and there are lists of classes and support groups. And then finally, for those of you who need it, the suicide hotline, the national number is 1-800-SUICIDE. I'd like to thank Beth and John for being guests on the show.
Thank you.
For closing words, I'd like to say, take courage, friends. The way is often hard. The path is never clear, and the stakes are very high. Take courage, for deep down there is another truth. You are not alone.